My father threw my things on the lawn, and 3 days later, my phone had 58 messages from him. This story that seemed impossible actually happened to me. I was so shocked when it happened. Let me tell you about it. Come along with me as we begin. I am Madison, 28 years old, born and raised in a small town in Ohio. My whole life, I tried to earn my father's approval. But on that September afternoon, he made it clear that nothing I ever did would be enough. Before we dive into this journey together, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you will want to stay with me through this one, because what happened 3 days later changed everything I thought I knew about my father. Let me take you back to the beginning, to help you understand how we got here. My father's name is Harold. He is 62 years old now, a former steel mill worker who retired early because of a back injury that never quite healed right. He spent 35 years working in that mill, breathing in dust and sweat, coming home with calloused hands and a silence that filled every room he entered. My mother's name was Dorothy. I say was because she passed away from breast cancer when I was 14 years old. She was the gentle one, the one who held our family together with her warmth and her patience. When she died, something in our house died with her. I am an only child. That means I carried all of my father's expectations on my shoulders alone. There was no sibling to share the weight, no one else to absorb his disappointments when I fell short. Growing up under Harold's roof was like living in a house with invisible rules that changed without warning. My father belonged to a generation that believed men should be tough, that tears were weakness, that self-reliance was the only path to respect. He never told me he loved me, not once in 28 years. I used to think maybe he did not know how. Now I wonder if he even knew he was supposed to. I remember being 9 years old, riding my bicycle down the gravel road near our house. I hit a rock and went flying over the handlebars. My knee was bleeding, gravel embedded in my skin, tears streaming down my face. I limped home, expecting comfort, expecting my father to clean my wound and tell me it would be okay. Instead, he looked at me from his chair in the garage and said, "Get up, walk it off. You are fine." I was not fine, but I learned that day that showing pain was not allowed in Harold's house. When I was 12, I entered the school science fair. I worked for weeks on a project about solar energy, building a small model that could power a light bulb using nothing but sunlight. I won second place. I came home with my ribbon, so proud, so eager to show my father what I had accomplished. He looked at the ribbon, then looked at me and asked, "Why did you not get first?" Not congratulations, not well done, just disappointment that I had not been perfect. That feeling of never being good enough, it sank into my bones over the years. It became part of who I was. No matter what I achieved, there was always something more I should have done. But my mother, she was different. Dorothy understood me in ways my father never could. She was the one who bandaged my knee that day after Harold went back to whatever he was doing in the garage. She was the one who hung my second-place ribbon on the refrigerator and told me she was proud of me. We had our rituals, my mother and I. On Sunday mornings, we would make breakfast together while my father slept in. She taught me how to flip pancakes without making a mess, how to scramble eggs so they stayed fluffy, how to brew coffee just the way my father liked it. Those mornings were sacred to me. They were the only times I felt truly seen. At night, when I was younger, she would sit on the edge of my bed and tell me stories, not from books, but from her own imagination. Tales of brave knights and clever foxes, of mountains that touched the sky and rivers that sang songs. Her voice was soft and warm, like a blanket wrapped around my heart. She used to tell me, "Your father loves you in his own way. He just does not know how to show it." I believed her then. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe that somewhere inside that silent, stern man was a father who cared about his son. Then the cancer came. It started with a cough that would not go away. Then the weight loss, the fatigue, the doctor's appointments that grew longer and more frequent. By the time they found it, the cancer had already spread to her lymph nodes. Stage 3, they said. They gave her a fighting chance, but cancer does not fight fair. 18 months. That is how long we had her after the diagnosis. 18 months of chemotherapy that left her weak and pale, of hospital visits that smelled like antiseptic and fear, of watching the strongest woman I knew become a shadow of herself. I remember the day she died. It was winter, a few days after Christmas. Snow was falling outside the hospital window, soft and quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. I was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, when she took her last breath. She just stopped, like a candle being blown out. I looked at my father across the room. He was standing by the window, his back to us, staring out at the snow. He did not cry. He did not move. He just stood there, still as a statue, while the nurses came in and the machines went silent. At the funeral, he stood beside her casket with a face made of stone. People offered their condolences, and he nodded without speaking. I cried until I had no tears left, but Harold never shed a single drop. At least, not where anyone could see. After my mother died, the distance between my father and me grew wider. She had been our bridge, the one who translated his silence into something I could understand. Without her, we were two strangers living in the same house. Harold started drinking more, not falling down drunk, not violent, just a slow, steady numbing that happened every evening in the garage. He would sit out there for hours with his bottle and his silence, and I learned not to disturb him. I tried to fill the gap my mother left. I took over the cooking, the cleaning, the grocery shopping. I made his coffee the way she used to, brought him dinner on a tray when he did not come to the table. But he rarely acknowledged my efforts. A grunt here, a nod there, nothing more. When I was 17, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. Instead of going to college, I chose to go into construction work. I wanted to earn my own money, to be independent, to stop waiting for approval that never came. My father was furious. He said I was wasting my potential, throwing away my future. We had our worst argument that night, shouting at each other across the kitchen table, saying things we could not take back. He told me I would amount to nothing. I told him I did not care what he thought anymore. That was a lie, of course. I cared. I cared so much it hurt. At 20, I moved out. I found a small apartment in a town about 4 hours away, close enough to visit but far enough to breathe. I got a job with a construction company, worked my way up from laborer to crew supervisor, built a life that had nothing to do with Harold and his expectations. We saw each other on holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, sometimes Easter. Those visits were always awkward, filled with long silences and conversations that never went anywhere meaningful. We would sit across from each other at the dinner table, two men who shared blood but nothing else, counting the hours until it was acceptable to leave. Every time I drove away from that house, I told myself it would be different next time, that eventually, somehow, we would find our way back to each other, that the wall between us would crumble if we just kept showing up. 28 years of trying to be a good son. 28 years of falling short in his eyes. And then something happened that brought me back to his house. Something I never expected. It was late August when I got the call that changed everything. I was at work, up on a scaffold, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The name on the screen was Eleanor Patterson, my father's neighbor. She was an older woman, around 70, who had lived next door to my parents for as long as I could remember. She used to bring us casseroles when my mother was sick. I had not talked to her in years. I climbed down and answered. Her voice was shaky, worried in a way that made my stomach drop. "Madison, I hate to bother you at work, but I did not know who else to call. Your father fell a few days ago. He has been in the hospital, but he did not want anyone to tell you. I thought you should know." My heart stopped. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. He hurt his hip. The doctors say he needs someone to look after him for a while. He has been alone in that house, Madison. No one to help him." I hung up and stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone in my hand. My father had been in the hospital for 3 days and he had not called me. He would rather suffer alone than ask his own son for help. But I was going anyway. I talked to my supervisor, explained the situation, and asked for an extended leave. Within a few hours, I was in my truck, driving the 4 hours back to the town where I grew up. The whole way there, I kept thinking about what I would find. My father, helpless and hurt. The house I had not seen in months. All the unspoken things between us. The hospital was small, just 2 stories, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. I found his room on the 2nd floor, near the end of a long hallway that smelled like floor cleaner and cafeteria food. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. Harold had always been a big man, solid and strong, the kind of person who took up space just by existing. But the man in that hospital bed looked shrunken. His hair had gone completely gray since the last time I saw him. His face was pale, lined with pain, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something softer that he quickly pushed away. "I did not ask anyone to call you," he said. His voice was weaker than I remembered, but the stubbornness was still there. I pulled a chair up beside his bed and sat down. "I know, but I am your son. I am here." He looked away toward the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You should not have bothered. I can take care of myself." "The doctor says you cannot, not for a while at least." He did not argue. That told me more about his condition than anything else. The Harold I knew would have fought me every step of the way. This man was too tired to fight. I talked to his doctor that evening. The fall had fractured his hip, and at his age, recovery would be slow. He would need physical therapy, help with daily tasks, someone to make sure he did not fall again. The doctor recommended at least 3 months of supervised care. 3 months. I thought about my apartment 4 hours away, my job, my life that had nothing to do with this house or this man. And then I thought about my mother, about what she would have wanted. I made my decision. "I will stay," I told the doctor. "I will take care of him." Getting Harold to accept my help was another battle entirely. He grumbled and complained the whole drive home from the hospital, insisting he did not need a babysitter, that he had been taking care of himself for years. But his body told a different story. He could barely walk, even with the cane they gave him. Getting from the car to the front door left him breathless and pale. The house was a mess. Dishes piled in the sink, dust on every surface, the refrigerator nearly empty. It was clear that Harold had not been taking care of himself, even before the fall. I spent that first evening cleaning, organizing, making the place livable again. The next few days fell into a routine. I would wake up early, make breakfast, help Harold with his exercises. The physical therapist came 3 times a week, and I watched carefully, learning the movements so I could help him practice on the other days. I cooked meals from memory, the recipes my mother had taught me. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes, chicken soup with homemade noodles, apple pie with a lattice crust. At first, Harold barely acknowledged my efforts. He ate in silence, watched television without speaking, retreated to his bedroom as soon as he could manage the stairs. I told myself to be patient. Rome was not built in a day, and neither was a relationship that had been broken for decades. But slowly, things began to change. One evening, about a week after I arrived, I made my mother's apple pie. I had not baked it in years, but the smell brought back memories so vivid, I could almost hear her voice guiding me through each step. I cut Harold a slice and brought it to him in the living room, where he was watching a baseball game. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and then looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before, something almost like gratitude. "The pie is decent," he said. It was not much, but from Harold, it was everything. After that, things got a little easier. We started watching baseball games together in the evenings, just like we used to when I was a kid. He would yell at the television when the umpire made a bad call, and I would laugh, and for a few minutes, it felt like we were a normal family. One night, he started talking about his childhood. He told me about growing up poor in a house with 5 siblings, about working in the steel mill from the age of 18, about meeting my mother at a church picnic when he was 23. I had never heard these stories before. He had never offered to share them. I realized then that my father was not just a stern, distant figure. He was a man with a history, with dreams that had been crushed by circumstance, with fears he had never learned to express. It did not excuse the way he had treated me, but it helped me understand. One afternoon, while Harold was resting, I decided to do some cleaning in the attic. The space was cluttered with decades of accumulated stuff: old furniture, boxes of clothes my mother had never thrown away, holiday decorations that had not been used since she died. In a corner, buried under a pile of old blankets, I found a wooden box I did not recognize. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. My parents on their wedding day, young and smiling, full of hope. Me as a baby, tiny and wrinkled, held in my mother's arms. Family portraits, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, a whole life captured in faded images. At the bottom of the box, I found an envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten on paper that had yellowed with age. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. The letter was addressed to my father. It was dated 2 weeks before she died. My hands trembled as I read it. "Dear Harold," she wrote, "I do not have much time left, and there is something I need to say. Our son is a good man. He has a good heart, but he needs his father. Please do not push him away. Please do not let your pride keep you from the only family you have left. He loves you, Harold, even if you cannot see it. And I know, somewhere deep down, you love him too. Show him, before it is too late." I sat there in the dusty attic, tears streaming down my face, reading those words over and over. My mother had seen what was coming. She had tried to warn him, and for 14 years, Harold had ignored her final wish. But maybe, I thought, it was not too late. Maybe this was our second chance. Maybe the accident, as terrible as it was, had given us an opportunity to start over. I made a decision that day. I would not leave until I had broken through my father's walls. I would not give up on him, no matter how hard he pushed back. I owed it to my mother. I owed it to myself. For the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: hope. The change came 3 weeks into my stay, and it came wearing high heels and too much perfume. Her name was Diane. She showed up at the door one Tuesday afternoon, carrying a casserole dish and wearing a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was around 55, with blonde hair that had clearly come from a bottle, and makeup applied with a heavy hand. Harold introduced her as his girlfriend. They had been seeing each other for a few months, he said, meeting at the senior center where he sometimes played cards. This was the first I was hearing about her. "I have heard so much about you," Diane said, pulling me into a hug before I could react. Her perfume was overpowering, something floral and cloying that stuck in my throat. "Your father talks about you all the time. He is so proud of you." I pulled back, studying her face. My father had never once told me he was proud of me. Why would he tell a stranger something he could not say to his own son? Something felt wrong from the very beginning. I could not put my finger on it, but there was something about Diane that set off alarm bells in my head. Maybe it was the way her eyes darted around the room, taking inventory. Maybe it was the way she laughed too loud at Harold's jokes, or touched his arm too often, or asked too many questions about the house, the property, his finances. I tried to push my suspicions aside. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was jealous that my father had found companionship after all these years alone. Maybe I wanted to be the one to save him, and I resented someone else stepping into that role. But the red flags kept piling up. Diane started coming over every day. At first, she was helpful. She brought food, cleaned the kitchen, kept Harold company while I ran errands. But gradually, she began to take over. She rearranged the furniture without asking. She moved my mother's photographs from the mantel to a closet, claiming she was freshening up the living room. She started answering the phone when it rang, speaking on Harold's behalf as if she had the right. Every time I tried to talk to my father alone, Diane was there. She would insert herself into our conversations, change the subject, redirect his attention. It was subtle at first, so subtle I wondered if I was imagining it, but the pattern was unmistakable. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and found Diane in my father's study. She was going through his desk drawers, papers spread out in front of her. When she saw me, she jumped, then quickly composed herself. "Oh, Madison, you startled me. I was just helping Harold organize his paperwork. He asked me to find his insurance documents." I looked at the papers on the desk. Life insurance policies, bank statements, the deed to the house. These were not the kind of documents you casually organize. "I can help him with that," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "He is my father." Diane smiled, but there was something cold behind it. "Of course, I was just trying to be helpful." She gathered the papers and left the room, but not before I saw her slip something into her purse. A small envelope, the kind that might contain a checkbook or a stack of bills. That night, I tried to talk to my father. I waited until Diane had gone home, until it was just the two of us in the living room with the television murmuring in the background. "Dad," I said, "how well do you actually know Diane?" He stiffened. "Well enough. She is a good woman. She cares about me." "I am sure she does. But she was going through your financial documents today. Do you not think that is a little strange?" Harold's face hardened. "She was helping me. Unlike some people, she does not treat me like I am incapable of managing my own affairs. That is not what I am saying. I just think you should be careful. You have not known her very long, and she seems very interested in your money." He stood up, his face flushing red. "Diane is the first person who has cared about me since your mother died. You should be happy for me. Instead, you are making accusations based on nothing." "I am not making accusations. I am worried about you." "You are not worried about me," he snapped. "You are here out of guilt, not love. You feel bad because you abandoned me for 10 years, and now you want to control everything to make yourself feel better." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had not abandoned him. I had tried over and over to maintain a relationship. He was the one who pushed me away. "That is not true," I said, but my voice was shaking. "I came back because I care about you, because you are my father and you needed help." Harold shook his head. "I did not need your help. I did not ask for it, and I do not need you trying to sabotage the first good thing that has happened to me in years." He left the room, and I sat there alone, staring at the wall where my mother's photographs used to hang. The space was empty now, just a faded rectangle where the frame had blocked the sun. After that conversation, Diane's behavior became bolder. When Harold was not around, she dropped the friendly act entirely. Her voice turned cold. Her smile disappeared, and she made it clear that she saw me as an obstacle. "You should go back to your life," she told me one morning while I was making breakfast. Harold was upstairs, doing his physical therapy exercises. "Your father does not need you anymore. He has me now." I put down the spatula and turned to face her. "I am not going anywhere. He is my father." "Your father," she corrected. "But you gave up that right when you walked out on him. I am the one who has been here. I am the one who cares about him. You are just in the way." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but what was the point? She had already made up her mind about me. And worse, she was making Harold believe the same things. The next few days were a nightmare. Diane poisoned every interaction, twisted every word I said into something sinister. When I suggested Harold should review his legal documents, she told him I was trying to take control of his estate. When I asked about her past, she accused me of harassment. When I tried to spend time alone with my father, she made sure to interrupt. Then I found the power of attorney document. It was in Harold's study, half hidden under a stack of newspapers. A legal form, already signed in my father's shaky handwriting, granting Diane full authority over his financial affairs. The date was from 2 weeks earlier, right around the time she started showing up every day. My blood ran cold. This was not just about companionship. This was about money, about the house, about everything my parents had worked their entire lives to build. I made copies of the document and started digging. I talked to Eleanor, the neighbor who had called me about Harold's fall. I searched online for any information I could find about Diane. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Eleanor told me that Diane was not new to this town. She had been married twice before, both times to wealthy older men. Both husbands had died, leaving her everything. There were rumors, whispers that followed her from place to place. Nothing proven, nothing official, but the pattern was undeniable. When I searched her name online, I found even more. Diane was not her real name. She had been born Diana Westbrook, and she had a history of fraud complaints filed against her in 3 different states. None had resulted in charges, but the accusations were consistent. She targeted vulnerable older men, manipulated them into signing over their assets, and disappeared when the money ran out. I printed everything: court records, news articles, complaints filed with consumer protection agencies. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find and prepared to confront my father. It did not go the way I hoped. I waited until Diane was not there, until it was just me and Harold sitting at the kitchen table. I spread the documents out in front of him, laid out everything I had found. Dad, please look at this. Diane is not who she says she is. Her real name is Diana. She has done this before. Targeted older men, manipulated them, taken their money. There are complaints filed against her in multiple states. Harold picked up one of the papers, squinted at it, then threw it down. This is garbage. Where did you even get this? It is public record. I found it online. Dad, please, I am not making this up. She is using you. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You are unbelievable. You come into my house, you try to turn me against the one person who makes me happy, and you expect me to thank you? I expect you to listen. I expect you to look at the evidence and see what is right in front of you. Harold grabbed the papers and tore them in half, then in half again. He threw the pieces on the floor like confetti. Evidence, he spat. You are jealous. You cannot stand that I found someone who cares about me, so you are trying to destroy it. That is not true. I am trying to protect you. I do not need your protection. I need you to leave me alone. We stared at each other across the kitchen, two men who had never learned how to talk to each other. I saw the anger in his eyes, but underneath it, I saw something else. Fear. He was afraid to believe me, because believing me would mean admitting he had been fooled, and Harold's pride would never allow that. Dad, I said one last time, please, just think about what I am saying. She is not who you think she is. He pointed toward the door. Get out. Go back to your apartment. Go back to your life. I do not want you here anymore. I did not move. I am not leaving. You are my father. I am not going to abandon you to someone who is trying to steal everything you have. His face twisted with rage. I said, get out. That night, I went to bed in my old room, the room where I had grown up, where my mother had told me stories and tucked me in. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the old house settling, wondering what would happen next. I found out the next morning. I woke to the sound of voices outside. When I looked out the window, I saw my belongings scattered across the front lawn. Clothes, books, the box of photographs from the attic, everything I had brought with me, thrown out like trash. I ran downstairs and out the front door. Harold was standing on the porch, arms crossed, face like granite. Behind him, Diane watched with a smirk that made my hands clench into fists. What is this? I demanded. I told you to leave, Harold said. You did not listen, so I made the decision for you. I changed the locks last night. This is not your home anymore. I looked at my things scattered across the wet grass. A photo album lay open, pages soaked with morning dew. My mother's face stared up at me from one of the pictures, smiling, unaware of what her family would become. Dad, please, do not do this. It is done, he said. Do not come back. He went inside. The door closed. The lock clicked. And I was left standing in my childhood yard, surrounded by the remnants of my life, while the neighbors watched from behind their curtains. I do not know how long I stood there, minutes maybe, or hours. The sun climbed higher, burning off the dew, and still I could not move. It felt like a dream, like a nightmare I would wake from any second, but I did not wake up because it was real. Eventually, I started gathering my things. I moved slowly, methodically, picking up each item and placing it in the back of my truck. Some things were ruined, the photo album soaked through, a box of books, pages warped beyond saving, a sweater my mother had knitted for me years ago, covered in mud. I found the family photograph at the bottom of the pile, the one from the attic showing me and my parents when I was 5 years old. The glass frame was cracked, the image water damaged, but I could still make out our faces. My mother, young and beautiful, my father, stern but not yet broken, and me, small and innocent, unaware of the pain that lay ahead. I held that photograph for a long time. Then I placed it carefully in the passenger seat of my truck and drove away. I did not look back. I called Derek from the road. He was my oldest friend, someone I had known since high school, one of the few people who had stuck with me through everything. He answered on the second ring. Madison, what is wrong? You sound terrible. I told him everything. The fall, the homecoming, Diane, the accusations, the fight, my belongings on the lawn. I told him about the changed locks and the look in my father's eyes when he told me never to come back. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come stay with me, as long as you need." "Are you sure?" "Brother, you do not even have to ask. Get here safe, and we will figure out the rest." I drove to Derek's apartment in Columbus. It took 3 hours, and I do not remember most of the drive. My mind was somewhere else, replaying the morning over and over, trying to understand where I had gone wrong. The next 3 days were the darkest of my life. I stayed in Derek's guest room with the curtains closed, barely eating, barely sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, hard and unforgiving. I heard Diane's voice, cold and triumphant. I felt the weight of all those years, all those failed attempts at connection, crushing me into the mattress. Derek tried to help. He brought me food I did not eat, offered words of comfort I could not hear. He told me I had done everything right, that my father would come around, that Diane would show her true colors eventually. But none of it helped, because underneath the anger and the hurt, there was a terrible thought I could not escape. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I had come back out of guilt. Maybe I had pushed too hard, moved too fast, tried to fix something that could not be fixed. Maybe I was the problem all along. On the third day, I finally picked up my phone. I had turned it off after leaving my father's house, unable to face whatever messages might be waiting. Now, with trembling hands, I powered it on and watched the screen light up. 58 notifications, all from my father. I stared at that number for a long time before I had the courage to look. The first message was sent just a few hours after I left. The timestamp said 11:42 in the morning. Madison, I found something. Call me. The second came an hour later. Son, I think I made a mistake. Please call me back. Then another and another, each one more desperate than the last. I read them in order, watching my father's composure crumble with every text. She had papers hidden in the bedroom, legal documents. I did not sign them, but they have my signature. I tried to call the bank. The joint account is empty. $30,000, Madison. She took everything. I was wrong about her. I was wrong about everything. Please come back. I am so sorry. For this morning, for throwing your things out, for all of it, please. I do not know what to do. I cannot reach her. Her phone is disconnected. She is gone. The messages kept coming, hour after hour, day after day. Some were coherent, others rambling. Some were apologies, others were pleas for help. By the second day, they had taken on a darker tone. I should have listened to you. You tried to warn me and I did not listen. Your mother would be so ashamed of me. I failed her. I failed you. I do not know how to fix this. I do not know if it can be fixed. Maybe it would be better if I was just gone. That last message stopped my heart. The final text was sent early this morning, just before I turned my phone on. If you never want to see me again, I understand. But know that I love you, Madison. I always have. I just never knew how to say it. I sat there on Derek's couch, phone in my hand, tears streaming down my face. All those years of silence, all those walls between us, and it took losing everything for my father to finally say the words I had needed to hear my entire life. I did not hesitate. I grabbed my keys and ran for the door. Madison, where are you going? Derek called after me. Home. My father needs me. The drive back felt endless. I pushed the speed limit, weaving through traffic, praying I was not too late. Those final messages played over and over in my head. Maybe it would be better if I was just gone. The words were a knife in my chest. When I pulled up to the house, everything was dark. No lights in the windows, no movement behind the curtains. My father's truck was in the driveway, but the house looked empty, abandoned. I ran to the front door and tried the handle. Locked. The new locks he had installed to keep me out. I pounded on the door. Dad! Dad, are you in there? No answer. I remembered Eleanor, the neighbor. She had a spare key, one my mother had given her years ago for emergencies. I sprinted across the lawn to her house and rang the bell until she answered. Madison? What on earth? The key, the spare key for my dad's house. Do you still have it? She saw the panic in my eyes and did not ask questions. A moment later, I was running back with the key in my hand. The house was silent when I entered. Too silent. I moved through the rooms, calling his name, fear building with every step. I found him in the living room. He was lying on the floor, not moving. An empty bottle of whiskey sat on the coffee table. Beside it, an open pill bottle, the contents spilled across the wooden surface. For one horrible moment, I thought I was too late. Then I saw his chest move, shallow, barely perceptible, but there. I dropped to my knees beside him. Dad, wake up! Can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered. He moaned something I could not understand. I called 911 with shaking hands. My father, he took pills. I do not know how many. He is breathing, but he will not wake up. Please, send someone, please. The ambulance arrived in minutes that felt like hours. I stood back while the paramedics worked, watching them load my father onto a stretcher, attach monitors to his chest, start an IV line. They were efficient, professional, calm in a way I could not begin to match. "Are you riding with us?" one of them asked. I climbed into the ambulance without a word. At the hospital, they took him into the emergency room and made me wait outside. I paced the hallway, unable to sit, unable to think about anything except those final messages. I love you, Madison. I always have. A doctor came out after what felt like an eternity. Your father is stable. We pumped his stomach and we are monitoring him closely. If you had gotten here 15 minutes later, we might be having a different conversation. I sank into a chair, the strength leaving my legs. 15 minutes. That is how close I came to losing him. Can I see him? He is sleeping now. We will move him to a room shortly. You can sit with him then. They put him in a private room on the 3rd floor. I sat beside his bed all night, watching the monitors, listening to the steady beep of his heartbeat. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, fragile in a way that broke something inside me. Around dawn, his eyes opened. For a moment, he just stared at the ceiling, confused, disoriented. Then his gaze found me, and something shifted in his expression, something I had never seen before. He started to cry. In 28 years, I had never seen my father cry. Not at my mother's funeral, not when I left home, not once. But now, tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, and he made no effort to hide them. "You came back," he whispered. "I did not think you would come back." I took his hand, held it tight. "I will always come back. You are my father." "I am sorry," he said, the words tumbling out like a dam had broken. "I am sorry for everything, for throwing you out, for believing her over you, for every time I made you feel like you were not good enough. You were always good enough, Madison. I was the one who was not good enough. I did not know how to be a father. I did not know how to love you the way you deserved." I squeezed his hand harder. "It does not matter anymore. What matters is we are here now. We have another chance." He told me everything then. After I left, he had gone looking for something in Diane's purse, some small thing he cannot even remember now. What he found was a folder full of legal documents. Forged signatures, transfer of deed forms, a plan to sell the house out from under him and disappear. He confronted her. She did not even try to deny it. She just laughed, called him a foolish old man, and walked out. By the time he thought to check the bank, the joint account was empty. "I was so sure I knew better," he said. "I thought you were trying to control me, trying to take over my life, but you were the only one looking out for me. You were the only one who cared." "I should have found a better way to tell you," I said. "I should not have pushed so hard." "No." He shook his head firmly. "You did nothing wrong. You tried to save me from myself. I was too proud and too stubborn to listen. That is on me, not you." We sat there as the sun rose outside the window, two men who had spent decades hurting each other, finally finding the words to heal. It was not perfect. It was not a complete fix for 28 years of damage, but it was a start. "She was the one who made me throw your things out," Harold admitted. "She told me you were trying to steal my money, that you came back to take advantage of me while I was sick, and I believed her. I believed her over my own son. She was good at manipulation. That is what she does." "That does not excuse it. Nothing excuses it." He looked at me with eyes full of regret. "Can you ever forgive me?" I thought about everything we had been through, the cold silences, the impossible expectations, the years of feeling inadequate. I thought about the man who never said he loved me, who never came to my games or my graduation, who pushed me away at every turn. And then I thought about the 58 messages on my phone, the desperation, the apology, the confession of love that had taken a lifetime to speak. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. I was just waiting for you to let me back in. He closed his eyes, and I saw the tension drain from his face. For the first time in my memory, my father looked at peace. Getting Harold out of the hospital was just the beginning. The real work started when we got home. The first thing I did was contact the police. I gave them everything I had found about Diane. All the evidence of her past frauds, all the documents she had forged. They opened an investigation and put out a bulletin for her arrest. Then I started calling her previous victims. It took time and persistence, but I tracked down the families of her former husbands. 2 sons, 1 daughter, all of them with stories that mirrored ours. Elderly father, charming woman, disappearing money. None of them had been able to prove anything in court. She is careful, one of them told me. She knows exactly how far to push, how to cover her tracks. We tried to press charges, but there was never enough evidence. There is now, I said. My father is willing to testify, and we have documentation of her forged signatures. Word spread among the families. They started sharing information, comparing notes, building a case that no single victim could have made alone. The daughter of Diane's first husband, a woman named Patricia, became our unofficial coordinator. She was a paralegal with connections in the legal system, and she threw herself into the investigation with a fury born of personal grief. My father died believing she loved him, Patricia told me. He left her everything, and 6 months later, she was gone. We lost our childhood home. We lost our inheritance. But more than that, we lost the chance to say goodbye. She isolated him from us in his final months. She made him believe we did not care. Her story resonated with me in ways I could not express. If I had not come back when I did, that could have been Harold, alone, manipulated, dying without his family. 3 weeks after the hospital, the police found Diane in Florida. She was staying at a resort in Tampa, using a fake name, already cozying up to another elderly man she had met at a hotel bar. They arrested her in the lobby while she was waiting for her target to come down for dinner. The trial happened 4 months later. By then, we had assembled a mountain of evidence. Bank records showing the transfers, handwriting analysis proving the forged signatures, testimony from 5 different families, all telling the same story. Patricia had even found a woman who had been engaged to Diane's second husband before Diane came along and stole him away. I testified on the 3rd day. I told the court everything, from the moment Diane walked into our house to the morning I found my father on the floor. I described the manipulation, the isolation, the way she had turned my father against me. Harold testified too. It took everything he had to sit in that witness chair and admit how badly he had been fooled. But he did it. He looked Diane in the eye and told the truth about what she had done. She did not flinch. Through all the testimony, all the evidence, all the families she had destroyed, Diane sat there with the same cold smile she had worn the morning my things were thrown on the lawn. She showed no remorse, no emotion at all. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict her on all counts: fraud, forgery, theft, elder abuse. The judge sentenced her to 7 years in state prison. When the verdict was read, Harold reached over and took my hand. We sat there together, watching the bailiffs lead her away, and I felt something I had not felt in years: closure. After the trial, we drove home together in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Not cold, not hostile. Just 2 men who had been through something together and come out the other side. When we pulled into the driveway, Harold turned to me. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me. I know I did not deserve it. You are my father. That is what family does." He nodded slowly. "Your mother used to say that. Family does not give up on each other." She was right. We got out of the truck and walked toward the house. Before we went inside, Harold stopped and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before: pride. "I am proud of you, Madison. I should have told you that a long time ago, but I am telling you now, I am proud of the man you became." I did not know what to say. After 28 years of waiting, the words I had always needed to hear had finally come, and they meant more than I had ever imagined they would. "Thank you, Dad." He put his hand on my shoulder, just for a moment, just a brief touch, but it said everything that words could not. The lawyer helped us recover some of the stolen money. Not all of it, but enough. The house was still in Harold's name, the forged deed transfer having been caught before it could be processed. We were lucky, luckier than many of Diane's other victims. Over the following weeks, I helped Harold get his affairs in order. New bank accounts with better safeguards, a legitimate power of attorney, this time naming me, a will that clearly stated his wishes. We went through everything together, no secrets, no walls between us. I decided to stay in town. I found a job with a local construction company, rented an apartment about 15 minutes from Harold's house. Close enough to check in on him, far enough to give us both space to breathe. Our relationship would never be perfect. Too much had happened, too many years had passed, but it was better, real. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a father. And Harold, for the first time since my mother died, seemed to have found peace. The healing did not happen overnight. For months after everything settled down, I still woke up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding. I would dream about that morning, about standing in the yard with my belongings scattered around me, about the look in my father's eyes when he told me never to come back. The trauma does not just disappear because the story has a happy ending. I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Elaine, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a voice that reminded me of my mother. I told her things I had never told anyone, about growing up feeling invisible, about spending my whole life trying to earn approval that never came, about the anger I still carried, even now, even after everything. Forgiveness is a process, she told me. It is not a single moment. You can forgive someone and still be healing from what they did. Those two things can exist at the same time. She was right. I had forgiven my father, truly forgiven him, but the wounds were still there. They would take time to fully heal. What helped most was time. Time and the small, ordinary moments that gradually rebuilt what had been broken. Sunday mornings became our ritual. I would come over early, before Harold was fully awake, and start the coffee. By the time he shuffled into the kitchen, there would be eggs frying in the pan and toast browning on the counter. We would eat together, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. He started telling me stories about my mother, things I had never known. How they met at a church picnic when she spilled lemonade on his shirt. How she made him chase her for 3 months before she agreed to a date. How he knew, the first time she laughed at one of his jokes, that he was going to marry her. "She saved me," he said one morning, staring into his coffee cup. "Before her, I was just like my father, cold, closed off. She taught me how to feel things, and when she died, I forgot everything she taught me. I went back to being the man I was before." "You can still change," I said. "I am trying. That is all I can do now. Try." He started going to a support group for widowers. He was reluctant at first, embarrassed to talk about his feelings with strangers. But after a few sessions, something shifted. He came home one evening and told me about a man named George, whose wife had died of cancer, just like my mother. They had gone for coffee after the meeting, talked for 2 hours. "I have not had a friend in years," Harold admitted. "I did not think I needed one. I was wrong about that, too." I met someone as well. Her name was Sarah. She was a nurse at the hospital where they had treated Harold, and we had crossed paths during one of his follow-up appointments. She had red hair and freckles and a laugh that lit up the room. We started dating a few weeks later. Sarah understood what I was going through in a way few people could. She worked with patients and families in crisis every day. She had seen the damage that secrets and silence could do to a relationship. She never pushed me to talk, but she was always there to listen when I was ready. I introduced her to Harold on a Sunday morning. I was nervous, worried about how he would react to someone new in my life after everything that had happened with Diane. But Harold surprised me. He shook her hand, asked about her work, listened when she talked. At the end of the breakfast, he pulled me aside. "She seems like a good woman," he said. "Do not let her go." It was the closest thing to a blessing I had ever received from him. 1 year after the worst day of my life, Harold and I drove together to the cemetery where my mother was buried. We stood by her grave, side by side, looking at the headstone that bore her name and the years of her life. Harold knelt down and placed a bouquet of flowers against the stone. Daisies, her favorite. "Dorothy," he said, his voice rough with emotion, I finally did what you asked. I did not push him away anymore. I know it took me too long. I know I made mistakes you never would have made, but I am trying. He is here with me. We are here together. He looked up at me and I saw tears on his cheeks. I knelt beside him and put my arm around his shoulders. We stayed like that for a long time. Two men who had almost lost each other, remembering the woman who had loved them both. Before we left, I pulled out the letter I had found in the attic, the one my mother had written to Harold before she died. I had kept it all this time, waiting for the right moment. I found this, I said, handing it to him, a while ago. I think you should read it. He took the envelope with trembling hands. I watched his face as he read the words she had written 14 years ago, the advice she had given, the love she had expressed, the faith she had placed in both of us. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. She knew, he said. She always knew. She saw what I could not see, what I refused to see. She loved us, I said. She wanted us to love each other. Harold nodded slowly. We do. It just took us too long to figure out how. We drove home as the sun set behind us, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was not empty. It was full of everything we had been through and everything we had become. I used to think that love had to be earned, that I had to prove myself worthy, that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, was good enough, my father would finally see me and be proud. But I was wrong. Real love is not about being worthy. It is about showing up, even when it hurts. It is about staying, even when every instinct tells you to leave. It is about forgiveness, not as a single act, but as a daily choice. My father was not a bad man. He was a broken man who did not know how to fix himself. And sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need our love the most. Forgiveness is not about forgetting what happened. It is about choosing to move forward without carrying the weight of anger. I forgave my father, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. If you are watching this and you have someone in your life who hurt you, I am not telling you to forgive them. That is your choice, and only you can make it. But I am telling you this. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It does not hurt them, it only hurts you. Life is too short to spend it waiting for apologies that may never come. Sometimes you have to be the one who takes the first step. Sometimes you have to be the bridge, even when you did not burn it. My father threw my things on the lawn. He changed the locks. He chose a stranger over his own son. But 3 days later, 58 messages told me everything I needed to know. He was not perfect. He will never be perfect. But he is my father, and in the end, that was enough. I want to thank you for staying with me through this story. It was not easy to tell, but I hope it meant something to you. Now I have a question. Have you ever had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply, or are you still carrying that weight? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories matter just as much as mine. If this video touched your heart, please hit the like button. It helps more people find these stories. And if you have not already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is struggling with family, with forgiveness, with letting go. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.